Hello, everybody. My name is James Zabrowski. I serve as the Executive Director for Collegiate Entrepreneurs Organization, and I'm really happy you're joining us today. As you can see, I'm in a bit of different scenery. I am up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, just a tad colder than my typical Tampa weather. And I'm excited to be with you today. This is going to be a fun session for a few reasons, but most notably, today's special guest is actually a CEO alum. He was the co-founding president of Lafayette College CEO chapter in Easton, Pennsylvania. And as we're getting to this point in this program, we're looking at this from a new and unique perspective. So as we got started alongside the business formation programs, we started, of course, with ideation and trying to identify opportunities and solutions. And then we ran in last week to concept viability, talking about the ultimate feasibility of your concept or idea. And today we're going to dive in deeper to our customer base. And in this process and in this boot camp, which is roughly built around the design thinking methodology, we looked at this from a kind of four-pronged approach. And now at the customer stage, we're trying to make sure that we know our customer base and we're providing something to them that's of interest. And so what we really like to kind of think about for the entrepreneurial process is that launch effort of evaluating new ventures and taking that first step in that direction. So for those of you who are brand new to today's segment, I want to tell you just a little bit about Collegiate Entrepreneurs Organization, why we exist, and then I will get to introducing today's guest, and we'll be off to the races. So our organization was founded in the early 70s with the purpose to inform, support, and inspire college students to be more entrepreneurial. We believe we do this by the operation of entrepreneurship clubs on university and college campuses, many of which you are a part of. We have about 250 different chapters across the US, with a membership contingency of about 16,000. And we host a global conference and a $20,000 pitch competition with the underlying emphasis of helping college students launch businesses. This 4-week program has actually been extended. So today we're going to discuss part 1 of the customer validation process. And next week we'll be joined by Becky Getz, who is a user experience expert, used to work for Capital One, now works for Amazon, and kind of evaluates the entire user flow. But today's guest is going to help us from his own unique perspective of entrepreneurial ventures and in his professional life, talk a little bit more about customer discovery. So for our guest today, entrepreneurship is nothing new. In fact, he has lived the family business lifestyle since he was the age of 3. And we're really not kidding about that. Videos exist of Chirag selling dresses and jackets in his family store in Manhattan at that young age. He's currently a content creator and business coach at entrekey.com and also serves as a customer success lead over at Google, where he helps large brands navigate the Google ecosystem. Today, in his free time, he explores burning topics for entrepreneurs and finds ways to help new and aspiring entrepreneurs better understand these topics. Chirag, I'm really happy that you're joining us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Oh, you're muted.
What a rookie mistake. Can you hear me? Is it all cool on my side?
We are good.
Perfect. I'm just confirming on my side. Okay, perfect. Hi, thank you so much. That was an awesome introduction. Yeah, no, my family definitely saw we were born and they were like, that's it, 18 years of free labor. Let's use it and go for it. So you can imagine how many dresses we sold as like this little 4-year-old, 3-year-old that's like convincing you that, hey, no, you look amazing in this. But yeah, no, absolutely grew up in that sort of entrepreneurial environment and absolutely loved the experience, but also, I mean, dealt with a lot of the negative aspects that come with it, right? So to fear of not always knowing exactly where the next meal, like if the business is going to be successful enough in the next month, where the next meal, some days were that tough of understanding, like, okay, are we going to have a business of the next day or next week even? But then also the really amazing aspect of it, right, is getting a chance to really be able to understand that like you can control most of the stuff that you do. Everyone's circumstances and situations are different, but what defines you is pretty much, are you able to get up in that morning and continue to keep pushing forward? So that was definitely something really nice to have learned young and then be able to pull on now. At the moment, I do work at Google. That's what I say is like my 9 to 5 job as a customer success lead, where I work with what we call our platinum clients and helping them navigate the Google Ads ecosystem. We're part of one of the key stakeholders in that relationship that they have between us and Google, between Google advertising and them. And then what I'd say is like my 5 to 9, when I'm not there working there, is running Entre, right? So I started Entre a couple years ago. I'd realized that business education was extremely inaccessible growing up. So when I went to college, suddenly found access to so much information out there that I just started nerding out over it. I ended up sharing some of it back home. My dad ended up using it, Indian immigrant, never went to college, entrepreneur his entire life. And suddenly he was coming back saying, hey, that thing you explained to me made sense. And we're like, okay, well, what if we could spread this on like a massive scale? And so it's kind of sad to say I fell into the typical trap of obsessing over perfection and taking too long to launch. But happy to say for the past year and a half now, Entrec's been running and knock on wood, been doing pretty well as far as sharing content out there and as a way for me to be held accountable to keep learning this stuff and sharing it with people. Like that was mentioned, in college, I think about my 3rd year in college, we found out about CEO, and our school was just sort of starting to invest in the entrepreneurship program. We were recommended like, hey, start a CEO chapter. That'll be an easy way to jumpstart things. We did it and we absolutely fell in love with it. Had a chance to go to Tampa for the 2019, I want to say, conference. Ever since then, just been a huge fan.
Our last one before COVID. Yeah.
Oh man, feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
But absolutely fell in love with it. And now I'm happy to be back and hopefully share some of the stuff that I've learned along the way.
Well, I'm excited. I too grew up in a family small business environment, and something that you said absolutely rings true. Not sure if the business is going to be around. Many nights of tuna helper and hamburger helper,
Right.
that kind of lifestyle of, well, we can't have that now, and then a dramatic difference, right, when things were well and going well. So thanks for sharing that. I think there's such a common misconception that small business owners are not entrepreneurs. And they absolutely undoubtedly possess the entrepreneurial mindset. Where the difference lies is that the small business owner, I find, and this is just a personal observation, you may agree, deeply enjoys doing a lot of the work themselves. So whereas the entrepreneur might try and build a large team and scale that, the small business owner tends to enjoy working with their family and keeping things small.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's funny that you mentioned that. That was actually a pretty big conversation when I first started learning about all this stuff back home, because explaining to my parents for the first time hearing the word entrepreneur, and I was like, you're entrepreneurs. And they were like, no idea what that means. And I was like, neither do I. Shit, it's a word that's used, right? Like, let's find out. But it's interesting. I think it also depends on the goal, right? So the distinction I've seen between small business and like what we call traditional entrepreneurship is the concept of how much sort of the level of innovation that you're bringing into it.
Yes.
So we see small business typically as businesses that entrepreneurs. So I guess a better way to say it is that all small businesses are entrepreneurs, but the better way to divide them is between this idea of growth and innovation entrepreneurs versus standard business entrepreneurs, right? So a small business typically tries to exist in existing structures and tries to use what may, for the most part, already exists within their industry with some unique twists. But entrepreneurs that we typically tend to see, right? Like the typical Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, right, that we tend to see are people who take that and then their ideas, one, their scale is much higher, and then their idea of innovation, right? At least that was the way that I've come to conceptualize it.
No, well, there's a lot of truth to that. Scalability is 100% probably the number one main designator. But you're right on the innovation side of things too, because most small businesses tend to remain small because they're solving a problem for a very defined community. You know, I live in Tampa, but I'm up here in Philadelphia right now, in a rural area, and it's quite amazing to see how different, you know, these small businesses up here survive and thrive, and they never, operate in a major metropolitan area. It just would never work. So, hey, you know, something that I thought was really cool, I took a look at your YouTube page,
Yeah.
and I went all the way back to the beginning, and I saw that you kind of started out with interviews, and now you have some
Yeah.
content creation. You know, when you were forming Entre, how did you determine? So you decided you're going to create these videos, right? You know, you surely made some assurances or assumptions about your audience, right? Surely they were proved to be wrong along the way, and you iterated. So let's talk about that. What did that look like for you?
Yeah. Long process, right? When we first started, this was, I would say, about sophomore year of college. Wow, I keep saying 4 years as if COVID didn't happen. So yeah, this would be almost five now, closer to 6 years. But at the time, it was just this base assumption of, you know what, this worked for my dad, right? So I just looked at him and I was like, okay, the target audience is small business owners. And in my mind, when I envisioned that at first, same thing that we just talked about right now was this idea of I was just thinking of the typical small business owner who's maybe 20, 30 years into the business. Pretty much I was thinking restaurants, right? Because our college had a huge sort of small business environment around it, predominantly being bars and restaurants, right? And so in my mind, I was like, okay, that's my target audience. And that was like the kind of people that I was trying to reach out to. And then the idea was, oh, we'll just create the videos and we'll put it out there, and like they'll see the value that's in it for them, right? And it was just obvious. Like it wasn't necessarily a thought that they wouldn't necessarily want this stuff. It was like, oh, well, my dad loved it, right? They must love it, right? Like to me, it was so obvious that this information was so important. And it was taking things like, by the way, to move back a little bit, when I say entropy, right? The initial version was just taking concepts that you've probably learned in this series, even for example, design thinking. Right. So taking something like design thinking and breaking it down to be like, okay, well, here's this big abstract concept. Now here's how it looks. Daily practices for small businesses. Here's how you're going to use these tools. OKRs, 4Ps of marketing, stuff like that. And so we originally went with that idea. Let's just put the videos out there. I think at that point, we were very discouraged very, very quickly when we realized that most of these small businesses, at least the small sample size we had around our college, didn't necessarily care, right, about this information, because to them, the 4Ps of marketing, it sounded interesting as a concept, but there were usually two big barriers, right? Either they wouldn't understand that the concept itself, they didn't see the value in it, or even if they saw the value in the concept, the problem is in the daily, if you go up to a restaurant manager who's running a restaurant, he's got to deal with inventory, they've got to deal with staffing, customers, all the millions of different things that they're doing on any given day. And then you're asking them, hey, by the way, we want you to take an extra like hour or two out of your week and plan and write these worksheets and papers and stuff. It was just not going to work on that side, right? Yeah. And then on our side, what we realized was, as well as we obsessed a lot over making the product perfect, which is one of the things that I'm hoping to bring up a little bit later, as opposed to making it like figuring out what the customer wanted, or in our case, what quote unquote was the customer with these restaurateurs. So instead of focusing on the mediums and the structures that they wanted and how to best fit into those, we kept trying to make what we thought was going to be the perfect product or the perfect videos. And obviously, I mean, those didn't line up. A little bit later, I'm going to fast forward through and happy to get into details as well. But fast forwarding, moving a little bit forward, what we ended up finding was sort of a catalyst for entropy was TikTok.
Okay.
Right. Because what I identified right off the bat, when we started about a year ago, right when the pandemic was right when the pandemic was setting in, the question I ended up asking myself was this, like, what do I actually like to do? Right? Because it went from being this extremely entertaining, fun experiment to now almost a chore, right? It was like every day I had to log in, keep track of videos, see what's going on, reach out to business owners, blah, blah, blah. And it was no longer entertaining or fulfilling for me to do this anymore. So the idea became, well, I love creating the videos. I love sharing this knowledge. And that was like the biggest thing. Like the moment I said I love sharing the knowledge, to me, immediately I'm imagining, oh, every time I've sat with a business owner and we walk through the 4Ps of marketing and they're like, oh, this thing makes sense. Here's how I'm going to use it. And then I'll do this and this. It's like, wait a second. That's what I love the most, being able to actually interact with people and share the knowledge. And then video making is just a passion of mine in general. So the idea became, well, let's first dig into that and see, let me open up the mold. What I thought was my ideal audience, let me break that and pretend like I know nothing. and just put out what I wanted to make. What I'll probably either find out is one of two things. Either I'll find who the ideal audience is for what I like to do, or I'll learn the tough lesson. Sometimes the things we like to do don't fit in with the rest of the world, at least in that moment or in that time. And it just remains a hobby. Right. So I started putting videos out on TikTok, and that's when I saw sort of a unique audience member come out, two unique audience members, college students who were taking marketing classes and who didn't really understand when their professor explained something like the 4 P's of marketing. But then with us being able to explain it, because when we would explain it, we would say things like, oh man, think about it like this, right? Like we'd give them realistic examples, we'd cut through the jargon, right? And then second, we're actually younger entrepreneurs who were just starting off. So people who during the pandemic had actually created businesses because they were just bored at home, right? So I had someone who's running, I think she hit 7 figures. Yeah, she hit 7 figures last month, right? Revenue in her business. Started on a whim on Shopify, right? Just started drop shipping, now has a brand that she's building out. But she jumped into it, and it was so easy for her to get started just because, the nature of online businesses and what we have today. But now it's so big, and she was like, well, what do I do? I'm kind of lost because I knew how to use this as a hobby, but now that it's this huge, big structure, she was still taking inventory on a piece of paper, right? Wow. For example. Yeah, right? Like no Excel spreadsheets or no docs or anything like that. So those were people who started reaching out, which at first was another big lesson of understanding what was like our key performance indicator. Because I was obsessed at first with the follower idea, right? Like that number. I wanted that number to go as big as grow as quick as possible. Realized that wasn't realistic because even at just 2,000 followers, for example, at TikTok, I had a ridiculous number of people reaching out on Instagram and email to say, hey, can I hop in a call with you and get your thoughts on this thing? Right. And that sort of opened my eyes of one, I walked into it thinking, here's the ideal audience. Yeah. As opposed to going out there and saying, okay, well, who is the ideal audience, right? So leaving that a bit open. I've learned a lot of lessons and strategies I can talk about for that to make it a little more actionable for everyone. And then the second point of understanding that a KPI, the most important thing is understanding what value, what metric do you really care about? And what we realized very quickly was that it didn't matter what the follower count was in some sense, right? Because the higher the follower count, the more of an audience you can reach out to, the wider you can cast that net. But what mattered to me most was, okay, well, how many number of calls, how many people am I jumping into a call with on any given day? That moving it forward, my college was actually, so the Entrepreneurship Center, when it got started, I was really active when it first got founded as one of the student fellows, and they were doing Innovation Week. So I reached out and was like, hey, I would love to come on campus and do a couple talks, right? And so they were kind enough, they put me up in a hotel, was able to come in, and it was like that sort of full circle moment of being a student in the center to now coming back as a speaker. They even gave me a funny headline, right? Title was like Innovator in Residence. Yeah. No idea what that means, what it does at all, right? I pretty much was just walk around and tell people to keep innovating, right? Okay. But the fun side of it is that I got to do these events where we had about 3 events: digital marketing, one-on-one for businesses, how to build a content brand and monetize it so it's meaningful. And then the third one was NFTs and what that technology really means for businesses. All 3 talks were like the highlight of last year for me. Because it was doing exactly what I love doing, which is standing in front of a crowd, talking to them, presenting this information, and then seeing them get excited, them talking back, which as well also, not to break your structure, but please, very, very open to people jumping in with questions. And so I'm very comfortable with that. And that's actually the part that keeps me motivated when I do these types of things. But yeah, got to see them get really excited. And then we ended up recording all 3 of those talks. On TikTok, I ended up as like a last ditch attempt because I'd focused so much on the quality of the videos. And so I was like, you know what, screw it. It was the last week of the year. And I was like, this is going to be my last video. I took up one of the clips of that video and tossed it onto TikTok. And it ended up doing better than almost any of the other content that had taken hours to create. And the videos, I mean, it's such a bad video wise that half the comments are people asking if I'm CGI. Wow. Right? Or if is this the metaverse? Or is this like an animation or something? Like that's how bad the video quality is. But it did amazing. I mean, I think that video is at 1.4 million at the moment views. And that was when the moment of everything sort of clicked in. And so for the past 2 months, the customer idea again shifted. The idea became, okay, what we realized from a lot of those comments were like, hey, my college professors always like taught me this and I didn't understand it at the time. Or why did I learn more from the 60-second video than I did in marketing class or something like that? Then we started doubling down, okay, focus on getting that cut through the fluff, right? We had a lot of fluff in most of our videos, especially some of the YouTube videos. Now we're getting more and more, okay, the moment the video starts, just start delivering value. Stop obsessing over how things look, stop obsessing over the details, give value. And then what we found was that humanistic approach. Our audience, we realized that college students and younger entrepreneurs were the target audience. What we hadn't realized was the context that they were coming in on. They didn't want someone who was going to be this expert, because I thought that I needed to constantly prove myself as like, oh, this is why you should listen to me, or like,
right,
value what I'm saying to you. And what I found, that felt disingenuous to me, because I was always be like, well, I'm not an expert or a guru. I'm just a guy who's nerds out over this stuff and loves to talk. He says, as he's been on a 5-minute ramble. But it was disingenuous to me. And then what I found was what they were looking for wasn't the older, just sort of, oh, I'm this experienced mentor. They were looking for someone that was around their same age who can just be like, oh, okay, that thing everyone keeps telling you to do, here's how you actually do it. Like, here's why it matters. Like, okay, here's how to take that thing that professor said. So in realistic, like, this is what it means. And ever since then, I mean, it's just been off to the races. So a lot of,
I love, Chirag, I love how you talked about kind of finding customer fit. So you talked about how your customer has changed a little bit over time. And it sounds like you're still kind of figuring out what that perfect fit is. And that's the model. I met with a student yesterday who is ridiculously enthused about his new venture that he's pursuing, which is always, as you know, for people like us, just very exciting, and it brings us a lot of energy. And I was sad to see that he got so disappointed when I started talking to him about the importance of first ensuring that the customer base is there. The customer base that he thinks is there is actually there. And it's a lot of work. The customer discovery process, you kind of plowed through it. Some entrepreneurs that are developing products or investing, a lot of dollars into products need to be a little bit more research centric, in the sense of, okay, I need to actually take some time to empathize with my customer, observe that customer in the space. I'll never forget, years ago, there was a very successful collegiate entrepreneur who never ended up really doing anything with this product, but developed a product. And I'm not going to, describe any details, but I remember he won competition after competition after competition. And he was very good at pitching, but when it came down to actually getting the product in the hand of consumers, he never once actually went to a brick and mortar location and asked consumers of this potential product if they'd buy it. Turns out that nobody needed it and nobody wanted it, and there was not a place for it in the market. And so, he made all of these assumptions and ended up, creating all of this product that just never ended up having a place. So I really like that approach. And I love how you also talked about the importance of just doing it, right? Because, like, as I said, with the product, you're putting a lot of dollars into the development of that. But if you're a service-based business, or you're a content creator, a lot of this is just, getting it out there and seeing what sticks, finding that first customer and making it work.
100%. I think one thing I'll also add on to that. So when I say that the target audience, right, and I'm being very mindful of the idea of not even calling them customers, the interesting, in today's society especially, and this is definitely true for content creation as a whole, right, in general, but I think also for most other businesses, and one I can give an example, understanding the difference between who your audience and aka consumer is versus the customer. Right. So even though for us, the college students who are who are interested in this kind of information, are the early entrepreneurs, even though they'll set down the time with me and I'll get to talk to them, for the most part, that's not where the selling or the purchasing actually happens. That's not the revenue generator. In reality, so the goal has always been give content away for free. It's the time, like, okay, if you're gonna book a session with me, that's where I'll maybe charge some, but even then it's relatively low compared to what we'll usually see other people charge.
Yeah.
Because for them, they'll consume the product. Getting a chance to be able to talk to them, the ideal audience, gives me an idea of, like, okay, well, what are the type of questions they're asking? What type of videos should I make? And then the question of who's my customer, it's for example, if I'm posting the videos on YouTube, it's the advertisers, it's that YouTube creator fund. On TikTok, it's the brand deals that want to get in front of the audience, right? So even if we find that it's not always the obvious customer is not always the customer, but making them the consumer. And especially in today's diamond age, I think you could do that for almost any of the companies that you're doing it for. Like, take an example. One of the best things a couple of years back, I read about drones. Actually, this was about 10 years ago. Drones, when they were first sort of becoming mainstream, and this was before a lot of regulations, I'd read an article where someone said that one of the potential uses was going to be taking drones, flying them over public lands where oil reserves are, right? Because oil reserves are somewhere stored in public lands, and that you could actually monitor how many oil tankers came in and left, and then also measure how much of the oil was in the reserves, because some of them were open, and then package that data up and sell that to people who are investing in oil futures and stuff like that, right? And that was for me like, whoa, like you'll think, okay, I'm buying a drone, like that's it. I'm the customer because I bought the drone and I'm using it to fly it around. Or at most, I'll take wedding photographies or certain cinematography stuff. But the idea of understanding that the drone is just it's just a piece of your business, the actual thing you're selling. Same with us. We're not selling our videos.
Right.
That's the stuff that we give away. What we're selling is access to a dedicated audience to the advertisers or to the brands. So understanding that for like that person who went through that experience, if they put that much time and effort into it, I'd be curious to see if they would be able to find someone else to fund it and then continue to keep targeting that original audience that they wanted to target, but this time with no price point, no price tag.
Right.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think that there, in that particular circumstance, there was a very clear product mismatch. But I do agree in that had just a tiny little bit of customer discovery occurred, maybe that would have ended very differently. Or the price point would have been different, or the launch date would have been different, or maybe they would have created an entirely different product. But I think that it's important, going back to the first student that I referenced, it's important to kind of remind everybody that creating a brand is fun. Creating packaging is fun. Creating your website, building content, all of these things that you have, a passion for, all of that's fun. A lot of the stuff that, takes research, takes time, takes, data truncation is kind of exhausting. And, you start to look at it and say, man, why am I doing this? Or this isn't really so much fun anymore. And I think that is where we as entrepreneurs allow our passion to kind of really push us through. So, you talked about having a passion for videography. You have a passion for content creation. What were some of your other passions that kind of pushed you along in your career?
Oh man. There was a video the other day that went viral. Someone saying that they have a bad habit of getting really interested in something, investing a ton of time and money over like a course of 3 weeks, and then just leaving it there, right? So in the back, you could still see some paintings.
Yeah.
And I think these two still have the blue tape on them that I still need to pull off, right? Never finished that, but I have a ton of art supplies that I thought I was going to use and I bought. Same thing with like a ton of other things that I've tried. I think the biggest hobby that pushed me, I focused less on the hobbies or the interest and more so on what are things that I like. So so for example, I love talking to people, right? As a general thing, what I've found is, especially within COVID, right? It was extremely tough to not be able to just go and meet people and be able to discuss stuff. So I tried channeling that in and just went, okay, I'm going to do any hobby or anything that involves being able to talk to random people. So sometimes like there were some weeks where I was reaching out to people on LinkedIn, right? Sometimes I was scouring news articles to read about new entrepreneurs and business owners and just being like, sending them an email, hey, let's hop on a call. And then being able to feed that into what I was doing here, which was moving more towards those those calls with the actual business owners. And then the videography side played in as well. Man, you're making me realize how boring my life is.
Well, hey, it's what's really cool about this is you're talking about another key point in the launch process, and that is avoiding distractions. Because as entrepreneurs, we tend to see these real shiny objects, and right, we get all excited about innovation. And today we're here, tomorrow we're there. And when you kind of really sink your teeth in and you decide, okay, this is my passion, this is the project that I'm going to work on, things change for you as an entrepreneur. And I'm sure that you've experienced that.
100%. I mean, there's so much filming equipment that just never gets used, but for at least a solid month, that's all I was obsessed over, reading millions of reviews, for every little thing that we were going to buy, right? That never ended up getting used, right? I
Yeah.
think today, of all the money I've spent, maybe 5% of that is actually being used in the current setup I have that actually films almost all my videos, right? But it was something, the website was the same thing, obsessed over that for months, right? Changed how it looked 8 different times. But you have to bring yourself in, which again brings you back to the KPI, right? That key performance indicator. What is the thing that you want to measure your value on? Which once we realized was, okay, for example, if our focus, like so far as the focus was followers, we were focusing on every little thing we could possibly do.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we should create videos like this. We should follow trends. We should do this, blah, blah, blah. The moment it became very simple, the focus is calls. Well, it narrowed down. There's still a million things we could do, but now instead of a billion, there's a million. And so like it slowly narrows it down because every time I'm going to do something, the question becomes, is this going to have an impact on that KPI?
Yeah.
Right. Is it going to increase that number? If yes, then okay, I'll explore it. And then also avoiding the mistake I made in the past, which was jumping into buying art supplies. Okay, buying 30 canvases off Amazon, and when I made maybe 2 paintings, right, was definitely a mistake.
Yeah.
Buying 5 might have been more appropriate. That idea of taking things in stages and breaking them down. So it's like, okay, can I do, and it was the same thing with videos as well for YouTube right now. For example, I'm moving over from TikTok to YouTube to have more long form content. Instead of originally the mentality was, okay, let's just think of it as a continuous never ending process. We'll always create videos 2 every week kind of idea. But now forcing myself to go, okay, let's break it down into achievable goals, going, okay, I'm going to create 10 videos. After those 10, until those 10 videos are done, I'm not going to make any major changes. After those 10 videos are done, then I'll sit down and decide what could I have improved in that entire process. And then also decide whether I even want to continue with this path or not before I invest in more resources and stuff. So that's definitely one thing I'd recommend.
I think that's phenomenal advice, because there is certainly a testing period for everything as the venture is becoming established. And I love your topic or your thought on stages. We as humans, we can do just about anything if we truncate it down into bits of time, right? I mean, you can do anything if you're saying, well, I'm only doing this for 2 weeks. It's just the way we're wired. And from that perspective, to that earlier story of the entrepreneur that was somewhat bummed that this was their next step and they didn't get to start product sourcing and creating really beautiful bottles and packaging and such. It's that, okay, well, we need to do this for the next 2 months. And for the next 2 months, we're going to do surveys, and for the next 2 months, we're going to go to fairs where our potential customer or audience is, and talk with them, get to know them, observe them, which is different than asking them to do a survey, and kind of just look at it from that never-ending search, that never-ending perspective. And I think that you've done a really nice job of kind of emphasizing that throughout our discussion so far. So do you have any thoughts? Because I have another topic to dive into.
Yeah, no, actually, so 2 things. One, a bit of an earlier part, it came back to me while you were speaking right now, was so despite the fact that I work at Google, this is coming from external, from that in my own personal experience, right? Not representing Google in any way.
Yep.
There's actually an incubator program within Google called Area 120, where internal Googles are able to come up with ideas and sort of pitch that into the incubator program to eventually become a potential future big Google product, right?
Okay.
The person who was heading it a couple years ago, when I first interned out at Google, I remember asking him, I was like, okay, when you're in, I had maybe 15 minutes to talk to him because we had such a busy schedule. So my big question to him was just, when you're sitting in front of all these pitches that you're sitting in front of, what's the number one thing you're looking at? And my idea was, I'll take whatever he said, and that's the thing I'll focus on most in my future pitches, right? And his thing was the thing I care about most is the person that's actually speaking. He's like, the decks, everyone tries to create a fancy deck. It doesn't really matter, right? The idea, he was like, oftentimes I'll usually ignore most of the idea because I know that by the time this product gets even 8 months into the program, it'll have changed like 50 different times. Right. He's like, the thing that matters the most is the problem statement, and the person that's speaking is how much do they really understand their customer. So I think he gave me the example of someone like, for example, if someone came in and said, hey, I wanted to start selling music lessons online, right? His whole thing was, well, what I'm trying to understand is how many musicians have you taught online already, right? How well do you know all the like the average musician, music student, so that if you understand your customer, The idea is how, as well as you know them, no matter what, the product will change over time, but it'll be okay because you understand your customer so well, the target audience so well, that you'll eventually find something that they need. Everyone needs something. First, are you the type of person who's versatile enough to keep pivoting? And then two, do you know the customer well enough so that like it's not going to take you 100 tries to figure out what they want, but it's okay if the first couple fail because you'll eventually be like, oh, okay, they don't want this thing, but I know that they'll want this thing and thing instead.
Right.
And I have access to 50 of them immediately to start asking questions about. The any thoughts on that before I go into the second thing that
No, I think that that's phenomenal. Now, you know, using let's just use a large tech company as an example. Large tech companies have the ability. I often look at Amazon and their AWS model for this, in how you know, internally they are often finding new opportunities. Those opportunities are kind of given several $1 million and a team of 15. And, you know, you start with one person who's somewhat the champion or, you know, the entrepreneur, if you will, and they get a lot of resources. And you're right, that concept changes, you know, 1,000 which ways before Tuesday. And that is such a natural progression for these tech companies, but for that entrepreneur, especially in the collegiate space, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are fearful to talk about their ideas. You know, that they think that you know, somebody's going to steal them, or they don't feel like they have that outlet, you know, to really have that discussion. I think that's a big part of it too. So, you know, to the extent that you are in that environment where, you know, in a lot of ways, what have you got to lose? You know, you don't have that car payment, that home loan, you know, the spouse and children. And, you know, the thought process then being, okay, well, this is somewhat of a fail-safe environment. Universities have always been traditionally the innovators in society. So how can I use, you know, the people around me to kind of sponge and, you know, kind of absorb thought process. So it's encouraging that discussion that then moves that idea forward. And it's, I mean, you're nodding your head. I mean, you got it, right? Yeah.
Oh, 100%. I guess the one thing I'll say is the best thing someone said to me, because I brought up that argument in the beginning also, where I was like, oh, what if someone steals the idea?
Yep.
And he was like, think about how many people have said, oh, like when Uber became famous, oh, I had that idea. And I was like, well, It doesn't matter because you didn't say it at the time, right? And especially in today's world, right? So like, for example, let's look at Gary Vee, right? So are you familiar with Gary Vee? Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. For most people, if you aren't, I don't even know what to describe him. He covers so many different hats. Internet celebrity, essentially,
Yes.
more in the business world, right? He's always going on and on about all these predictions and like concepts and things that he necessarily isn't working on, but he's just passing his thoughts and comments on, right? And the idea becomes, because at the end of the day, he knows that what matters the most is attention, right? Most of the stuff is attention. Business, in order to generate revenue, it's attention. In order to move any brand or anything move forward is attention, right? So worst case scenario, even if your idea doesn't work out, it's important to establish yourself as someone who's able to think in that capacity, right? Mm-hmm. So someone who's telling me was like, okay, well, talk about Entropy everywhere and anywhere you can. The chances of someone taking your idea, running with it, and doing the exact thing that you were imagining doing, very, very low. But the plus side is you start cementing that sort of the brand of someone who's thinking in this field, who's capable of sort of executing in that entrepreneurial mindset. There's a worst case scenario where reality is most businesses do fail, right? Or a high percentage of them do. If Entropy ever fails in the future, it doesn't matter because what you would have built up that brand of being that person who could think in the entrepreneur vote. You can always use the brand and the attention, move that to another product. So the downside of sharing your idea, someone taking it, very rarely does that happen. But the upside is always great because, hey, even if someone were to take an idea and run with it, you'll still always be that person. Oh, this guy had videos. Like Gary Vee's whole thing is he was talking about social media before social media was big, right? And he harps on that a million times, right? He's like, I was talking about it. And therefore, because I was so early there, what I'm saying about NFTs, you should be listening to me about that because that technology is going to do the same thing. Right. So worst case scenario, someone takes your idea, but no one can take the brand that you're building up. So while you have the idea in the space in college, where oftentimes if you are the loudest person in the room, you're also the youngest person in the room, that stands out, right? Yeah. It's really fascinating when a first year student is able to come in and say, oh, I have this idea, because most people aren't paying attention to the idea. They're paying attention, wow, first years really got their stuff together. Yeah. Right. And that's what they'll remember in the future, as opposed to the idea that you may or may not have had at that time.
Yeah.
How do you think?
Yeah. So let's move into
Yeah.
kind of some of the things that we had planned to talk about. We were
Yeah.
talking about a lot, and we could
Yeah.
go on forever. But one of the things I took a look at one of your most recent videos, Chirag, and
Yeah.
you kind of talked about the struggle and the solution of kind of getting to and maintaining loyal customers.
Yeah.
Now that's obviously that's the sweet spot, right? For the small business owner, for your early stage entrepreneur, you want you want the customer base to be very willing to work with you, and to iterate with you, to be comfortable with your beta versions, your test versions, and take it a little bit of a step further and dive into those software updates that you're rolling out, and you fix one thing and break 10 other things, and they're still willing to be there and work with you. So for a startup, what does a loyal customer look like, or for a small business, in your opinion and your experience?
Yeah. Well, so the term and what I base this off of is so I try to bring everything back to concepts and models, right? This
Okay.
way we can get most of the chaos that's in our minds out into paper, right? And look at things, like you said, with stages, right? So if you look at, there's a model called, the first one I'll talk about is the customer loyalty ladder, which is the one that video I think covered, the one that you're referencing, right? And it's essentially, it argues that the average person that's interacting with your brand or your business will go through about 5 stages, right? The first stage, and like a ladder, they'll move up those stages. Now, the top layer is an advocate. Interestingly, the word customer is used on the second and third layer. So the first one is someone who is a prospective, so someone who may end up buying from your business. Customer is the second level.
Mhm.
Then you have someone who's a repeat customer. Then you have someone who's become a supporter, and lastly, an advocate. And when I look at a startup, right, especially in the beginning where you don't have a lot of scale as far as reach for people, the biggest focus, I believe, should be on building advocates, because advocates are people who go out on your behalf to actually advocate and say, hey, you should check this startup out. You should check this business out, which as a startup is the most powerful thing you can have, is other people vouching for you. Even just beyond, even if it's not your customer, even if it's a mentor who's able to go talk to other people who might be interested in investing. If it's someone like you who's able to then take that idea and go talk to some other places, like some of the sponsors that are for CEO, right? So it's like identifying, how do we build advocates? People will talk for us. If you want, I can go through now. How detailed do you want? I can walk through the steps and sort of how to.
Well, let's focus. I really like the advocate thought process, because again, the purpose of this program is to get idea to fruition.
Yeah.
And I think for that purpose, advocates are clear and cut, your best first step. So if we could go a little bit deeper, let's help our student members get to the point of finding and identifying those advocates. So one of the things I always talk about in my classes is the importance of not showing them a product like an iPhone and saying, how much would you pay for this? But rather, bringing the device or the software or the service to them, and saying, hey, I would really love it if you would be willing to critique my business, or what I'm demonstrating to you or showing you, and give me some feedback. And if you like it, I'd love it if you'd share it with some of your friends. I mean, is that a viable approach for the startup?
100%. I think right off the bat, I think the thing that I would say, so if we look at it in stages, right? The idea, again, it's kind of overwhelming to imagine it as like, okay, you need to go out and get advocates, right? Yeah. If you go from through that steps of looking at, in order to turn someone into an advocate, they first need to become, they need to be someone who's perspective, right? And high interest. You can give me one moment. I'm trying to think. So with I'm going to base it off the example you give me, right? So say you build up an MVP and you have the product and you're like, okay, I'm ready to go take this out. What I would usually recommend for people, the typical route, right, is they'll go and show it to everyone that they possibly can. And then they'll say, can you please give me some critiques or some ways that I can improve it? I think that has its place. The only reason I would push back a little bit on it is to be very careful at who you're talking to and how much you're letting their input. Like, what is your key KPI from that, right? What is the goal? So when you go to someone, so for example, you came to, if I came to you, right, with my product, with this idea, if you're not my target audience and all I'm asking is, hey, how would you, how do you think I should improve this, right? And you give me a ton of suggestions. Well, that's great. Now, what we'll usually see is people then obsess over those obsessions. I'll do that with you and I'll do that 20 other people. Everyone will give me 5 ideas because everyone loves being a critic, right? The role of a critic is often very easy, right? So they'll give and then across the board, I've got 100 ideas of how I should improve my product, which now I just end up investing all this time on improving my product and further growing that insecurity in of itself. Why didn't I realize this stuff? So one, being very careful about who you're going to. I think that strategy works when you walk into those meetings knowing, oh, I'm not actually here to get the ideas from them. What I'm here to get from them is the emotion or the feeling or the ideology. So for example, the quote that I'll usually use for people, there's like that famous quote from Henry Ford, right? It was like, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Right. And people often say that, oh, he didn't believe in market research. But if you read any of his autobiographies, he did. What he was saying, his like basic concept from that was, if I come to you and you go, oh, Chirag, I want you to, so for example, if I have a sign up process for my app, like for in order to sign up, and it has 8 pages to go through it. And I told you, hey, James, can you go through it? And then I'm like, so how would you make that better? You'll be like, oh man, maybe you should like move this all into 1 page, or maybe, right? Say you give me that suggestion, you move it all into 1 page. I took 8 pages worth of questions, put it into 1 page. Does that really solve the issue, or is that solving the symptom that James felt like 8 pages was a lot? But if I take what you said to me and I put the suggestion that you gave me to consolidate all 8 pages into 1 page, I put that to the side for a moment and I go, okay, I'm going to ignore the solution. It's like going to the doctor. If I go to the doctor and I tell him I have a cough and I have my throat hurts, he's never going to go, okay, what do you want me to give you? Because because I don't know any better, I'll say, well, give me something for the cough and then give me something for the throat. But he, as the expert, will hear my symptoms and say, okay, this is being caused by XYZ pathogen. I'm going to give you this antibiotic or something. So he'll treat the root. Same thing with this. I'll take a look at what you've told me is a symptom. You hate there's 8 pages and you think I should put it down into 1 page. Instead, I'm going to go look, what was the root? The feeling that he has is that this process feels long to him. It's not just that it's 8 pages and 1 page is going to solve it, because if the process feels long, even if it's just 1 page, all those questions are going to feel long. So can I solve rather that feeling or that base emotion that he's feeling? If you can keep that in mind, then I think the strategy you mentioned works great, because you can then go talk to millions of people and get your word out there.
You're spot on. And the importance of understanding that you have an audience and you have customer segments. When, once you get that MVP, now I'm testing, this customer segment that I've theorized, has the most potential for user base. But what I might learn is that customer segment may have 0 interest, and then I might need to look at a different customer segment, or I might need to alter my product if, in your words, the KPI, the key metric, is being met. If the KPI key metric is being met, then I might need to adjust what I've kind of developed. I love that. I think that's a really good takeaway for advocates.
One thing I would add on to that as well. I mean, let's bring it into real actionable items for people, right? With today's tech, I mean, let's take a look at Reddit and let's take a look at Quora, Yahoo Answers, which I don't even know if Yahoo Answers is actually still around, right?
Ask Jeeves.
Ask Jeeves, right? Discord servers are huge right now. Chances are, for the most part, whatever segment or interest that you're going towards, there's going to be an online community somewhere out there. And so my first initial suggestion would be is you don't necessarily have to follow the same typical startup model that was often followed in the past. Do the modern version of it. So instead of maybe even if you don't have the capacity to go door to door knocking and asking people, join these communities and then don't sell any service. Don't sell anything. Just ask questions. See the type of questions people are asking. What are the type of topics that they're talking about? And then what it'll do is give you a chance, 2 chances. Either if you're so early in your ideation process where you're saying, okay, I don't have the product fully fleshed out, I'm going to listen to all the questions and stuff they're asking, the things that people are talking about in these communities. It's easy to join a Discord group, right? I'll listen to what they're saying and I'll use those to come up with features and benefits for my product. Or if my product's already developed out, I'm now going to listen to what they're saying and find out how can I reframe the benefits or the features of my product to fit into those.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea of like Apple had that famous example of one of the most successful ad campaigns was they didn't come out with the iPod saying, oh, it has XYZ gigabytes. Their slogan was 1,000 songs in your pocket. Right. And arguably, I mean, many argue that the iPod wasn't the most advanced or the best product out there at the time, but the marketing blew it out of the water because no one really conceptualized 16 gigabytes back then, but they did understand 1,000 songs in your pocket. Right. Same thing with this. If you have a product that's developed out on you, what are the words that people are using in these groups, in these online communities, will help you figure out, well, how do I put it in their words? Someone's like, oh man, I hate how where taxes are coming up, right? Mm-hmm. TurboTax uses this a lot. TurboTax doesn't really hone in on the, look, we've updated all of the laws and we have everything you possibly need. And we've taken a look at penal code XYZ. Right. Most of their advertising is around the idea of like, oh man, don't taxes suck, right? Yeah. This is so long and cumbersome. We got you, right? And there are always these outrageous ads of someone doing their taxes on a boat. Yeah. They identified that the audience, in order to get their audience to care enough to even interact with them in the first place, was speak in their language. So if you're struggling to get people to even get into the conversation with you, to give you ideas, my suggestion would be you're just using the wrong words. You're not using words that are enticing them in that sense. Yeah. Listen to them a little more.
That does a really, that's great to kind of segue into our next topic, because in another segment, I think it's your Entre short stories series, you talk about selling the experience and not so much the product. And I think you just kind of touched on that a little bit. But, you know, the goal of this series was to, you know, help us all identify, you know, problems and create a solution for those problems. So, you know, now that we've created that solution, we're evaluating our customers, you know, what type of experience are we selling versus our products? How does an entrepreneur look at that? What's the, you know, easiest form for them to understand that model?
Yeah, I think the old way of doing it, right? The old adage was solve problems or pain, right? People pay for anything that'll remove their pain, right? So that's a solid place to get started. So it comes back to the features and benefits argument, right? So instead of telling me what your product does, tell me how that product is going to help me. And the old way was the primary thing what people would focus on was pain, right? And oftentimes, sometimes it was even making up pain, right? So Listerine was super famous for doing this, right? So before a couple decades ago, bad breath it was a thing, but it wasn't as big of a thing as you see it now, right? Until I think Listerine was famous for creating an ad where they played off of the social climate at the time. It was a woman crying because no one would marry her because she had bad breath, right? They launched that ad campaign and they created this problem for people that they didn't realize they had. And they're like, okay, Listerine will solve it for you now, right? So one way is going with that, highlighting the pain instead. So they didn't say, oh, we have these germ fighting things and we use this type of alcohol in it. They didn't focus on the ingredients, the features, they focused on the benefit that people would get from it. That's on the pain side. On the other side, I would take a look at, for example, what Febreze did a while back. So Febreze, when it first launched, they were very excited about it, saying, oh, we've created something that's going to eliminate odors and this will sell off the shelves because no one else has this kind of to the level that we've done it at. It launched and the product almost flopped immediately, right? So they went out, did a bunch of product research, and they found two big things. One, there's a famous story of their one of their target audiences. They went to her house to interview her, to ask her a bunch of questions, and the smell, like the house just reeked. She had a ton of cats. Anytime one of the cats got near any of the interviewers, they were gagging. But they didn't mention it, right? Because they didn't want to say it. They wanted to see what she was thinking. So one of the interviewers was just like, hey, you know, I noticed your cats. And apparently the lady went, yeah, isn't it great how they don't smell? Right? And so to her, she was so used to the smell. And that's when they realized the first point was they thought that their audience would understand that they had odors. Their audience, I don't need something that's going to eliminate odors because I don't have odors. So one route that they took was with some of their advertising was they would show like a friend coming over to a house and be like, damn, like, dude, your house kind of smells, right? And so to put that idea into regular consumers' mind, I wonder if my friends think my house smells and I don't notice it. Right. I'm going to go buy Febreze. That's a little more expensive when you're actually trying to change and introduce a new idea for your consumers. I would go down the second route for a startup, which is what Febreze did, is they started watching people use Febreze. They had a bunch of people came in and they watched what they were doing. What they noticed was that there was one lady who she would clean the room. Then after she cleaned the room, she would spray a ton of Febreze all over the place,
Mhm.
which to them was shocking because they thought one bottle of Febreze was supposed to last you a long time. This woman had gone through like a segment of it. It was going to be done in pretty much 2 weeks. They're like, whoa, you're gonna have to buy a ton. But what they realized was she didn't look at it as a cleaning tool. She looked at it as a reward. It was her way of telling herself, oh, I'm done cleaning this room because now it smells all nice.
Yeah.
And so every time she went to clean, that positive reinforcement happened of like, oh, I have to use Febreze because that's when I know I'm done with this room and I can move to the next
Wow.
one. That's when Febreze shifted to making their really cool scents and smells. It moved away from hiding scents to actually making sense. And then that was where like, that's where I would say for startups, right? If you have a product and you're confident that it's a good product and you want to keep the product and test it, before changing it, my recommendation would be is repackage it and figure out jobs to be done theory. If people have time, I think Professor Clayton Christensen wrote an entire book about it. Figure out what job people are buying your product for to solve, right? People were buying Febreze not to mask odors, but because they needed something that was going to make the place smell nice and almost as a way to reward themselves after cleaning.
Right.
Once Febreze understood that, they didn't have to change the product; they changed the messaging.
Right.
That's what I would say for, especially if you're a startup early on. Before you decide to radically change your product, figure out ask your customers, talk to them and study them, see why they're using your product and see if you can fit the packaging somewhere.
Yeah.
Is that actionable?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic advice and great real world experiences. So what I want to do at this point is just remind our attendees that if you do have a question for Chirag, I do ask that you turn on your camera, remain muted and turn on your camera so that we can kind of tee you up in the question queue. You're also welcome to drop it in the chat and we'll ask it for you on your behalf. We're going to keep going through questions. So, as you have in our discussion, so as you have questions, feel free to hop in and we're going to wrap up in about 15 minutes here. Chirag, let's talk a little bit about methodologies. You've done a really good job of kind of painting your picture in your personal career, professional career. We've talked a little bit about some of the shorts and videos that you did, but in your role in Entre, in your mentorship, in your experience at the university level, in your experience at Google, what are some tools or methodologies that you've employed in kind of creating that connection with the customer? Do you have any, tips and tricks for, our entrepreneurs today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. First, general tip, break it down into stages. I'll say that a million times, right? Take it down. So for example, I was working with someone and her idea was the way she got most of her customers was through Instagram ads. Right. And she was viewing it as like one big action. People saw the ad, clicked it, became customers. What we did is actually break it down, right? So someone sees the ad, they end up, first step is they interact with the content that you have on your page. Second step that they're usually taking is they'll follow. The third stage is they'll actually click the link in your bio to go to your website. Fourth stage is they're on your website. And then there's a ton of stages they'll take on their website. So the idea was for the Instagram ads that she had, the goal was no longer for them to make customers. It was for them to just simply get people. What she was measuring, that KPI was how many people went from the Instagram ad to actually ended up following. So went to that next stage. Same thing with this is I would say break everything down into stages. It makes it easier to measure the percentage of people that are converting across the stages. And then the ideology that I'm going to bring in here is ruthlessly measure every midpoint. So by breaking that process down, she was able to see like, okay, 40% of people went through stages 1 through 5. Between 5 and 6, we lost almost 90% of the people that were at stage 5 before they got to stage 6.
Okay.
But so instead of looking at it as one big process, she was now able to find the exact point in her entire process that was causing the most people to leave. What she found was the problem wasn't her Instagram ads. It wasn't the Instagram. It was the website, her homepage. The moment you loaded up the homepage, suddenly people were there for like, it wasn't even the homepage. Homepage, it was the product page. It was the product page. We went through the homepage, went to the product page, and then immediately left.
Wow.
We looked at the product page. She had spent all these months obsessing over the Instagram and everything else. And then we realized the product page barely had any information that she needed. to actually sell the product, right? To actually talk about it. So breaking it down in stages, this is something that she would have never realized if she just viewed it as one big action. I guess I'll give one actionable strategy, right? Which I'm curious to see if people apply it. Please reach out. Let me know how it goes for you. If I was in your shoes right now, so James tells me that most of you are coming up with ideas at the moment and fleshing them out, right? Let's use modern technology that we have out there at the moment. A possible path to take: join those Discord groups, the Reddit groups, listen and see what people are talking about in that space, in that industry. Then from there, start up a social media channel on any of the platforms, right? Whether it's Instagram, TikTok, or so, and just start creating content without your face in it, in which you're just sharing things from that industry, or that they don't niche down onto any product or anything, just your industry. One of the famous ones about this was, oh man, there's one in like the consulting world. So there was this guy who made an Instagram page, and what he would do all day is just repost, he would just post memes about working in consulting. And then a bunch of people in consulting who like resonated with that would just join and follow. And because he wasn't using his face, it was just random funny things. They weren't like, it wasn't hard action for them to follow because they weren't following a person. They were just following the jokes and the comedic aspect of it. He went on, and I think like now he generates 6 figures from that, and he hired someone to join on with him for that. But the idea becomes, anyways, we're going to move back from there. Say you have an idea in that's going to go for restaurants, right? For example, I'd go on Instagram. I'd create an Instagram page, which has and I would just keep filling it with a ton of restaurant facts and like jokes even, or anything. Comedy is always the easiest way. And you'll start generating an audience there of people who start following, not because they're following you and the brand. I wouldn't mention anything about the brand or you at all, just these jokes in the general area. You now have a collected group of people who are in that restaurant industry. So if your target audience, if you're building something for restaurant managers, then you want the jokes and the content to be about stuff like the common struggles that a restaurant manager might face, right? And making jokes of those. So you get a ton of restaurant people or in that industry who'll start following. From there, using modern tools, right? So for example, if you set up a website, a landing page is an absolute must. The moment you have an idea or even a semblance of an idea, I would go to Wix or any of the services that CEO, I'm sure, I think if I remember correctly, you actually partner with.
We do. Klaviyo provides e-commerce.
Dang.
Yeah.
Even better. That's Klaviyo's awesome. Klaviyo's perfect for this.
Yeah.
So I would create a landing page immediately. The moment you have a semblance, if you know what industry and the general gist of what your idea is, I'd open up a landing page, throw in some details in there, right? Really follow through. Klaviyo has a whole tutorial series for it. From there, I would install in.
It's free to CEO members, by the way.
Bang. I would add in analytical tools. So Facebook Pixel, TikTok's version of Pixel, Google Analytics, right? From there, you've dedicated the small audience. All you need is about 100 people to follow that, to move from that Instagram page in, right? Because most of these analytical softwares will anonymize data after, they'll start sharing that data after 100 users, right? You tell that audience members that you have there, once you've created a sizable audience on Instagram or something, just off jokes and like this general information, or do it in the Reddit group. Keep commenting in the Reddit group until people start trusting you as someone who's replying. In Quora, right? Quora is a space for people to leave questions. If your industry is restaurant managers, look for questions that people are asking in like the restaurant thread, right? Answer some of those questions. Start building up that credibility in any of these spaces. Then tell people, hey guys, I'm working on this interesting thing. I'm not selling you anything at the moment, but if you're fascinated, come check this stuff out. They go, say if James is an ideal someone that I think is going to be an ideal customer over time. When he goes to visit my website, now analytics across Google, Facebook, TikTok have picked up James. Over time, it's going to keep doing this. Once I've got a sizable amount of data, I'll be able to ask these big platforms, hey, Facebook, Google, and TikTok, right? I want you to take a look at all the people that came to my site. Now what I want you to do is find me lookalike audiences. So find me people that are like James, that have the same interests as him. Now let's run ads, right? And this way, instead of just going like one of those wild, like I'm just gonna throw everything out there kind of scenarios, you're actually targeting people who've already shown an interest. These platforms go out, start giving you all of this, start bringing people like James to your site. Now you move into the purchase side. Then you go, hey, cool, you brought all these people. Now only focus on the percentage of people that actually bought my product or whatever that stage that you want, left their email. So cool, you brought me 100 James, but only 20 of them left their email. I want you to ignore those 80 that didn't, focus on those 20. Now, can you bring me more people like those? And what you end up doing is you end up using technology that already exists out there, something that you would never been able to do 10 years ago. Instead of you stressing about finding who your ideal target audience is and who you should be reaching out to, let these systems help you find them.
That's such a great point. We do this with our Facebook and Instagram advertisements for CEO as it relates to our conferences, our pitch competitions. We create these lookalike audiences, but you have to have a pretty good idea of who your audience should be to kind of leverage that technology. So I love what you've laid out here, and I know you have something to add to that. So go ahead and add, and then I'll dive in with my last question. So I just want to let everybody know this is my last discussion question. Feel free to ask any along the way.
Yeah, a strategy I would take if you're currently if you found out the industry you're interested in. So for example, mine was business education, making that accessible, right? If I was starting over at day one today, the first thing I would do is I wouldn't even reach out to anyone. I would go and research a ton of these concepts. So for example, the 4 P's of marketing, the stuff I was talking about today about brand ladder. I would create long blog articles about this, a ton of content. And what I would do is I would post that up onto the website for Entry, right? So I would want to have like, say 100 articles across a bunch of different concepts and like these short videos, and just fill up my website with as much value and content as I possibly can. And then make sure that the landing page and all the pages have these amazing, like, hey, sign up for more or get interested in more or some sort of action I want people to take. Now, because of how advanced these technologies have become, Facebook offers automatic I forget what they're called, but I know Google does smart campaigns.
Okay.
Where if I tell it, hey, you search my website, based off of what's on my website, you find me people that are going to be interested in this stuff. So if you're someone who's really lost and you're like, okay, I really can't figure out who my customers are, Hail Mary is okay. Fill your website up with all the information that like you possibly can about your industry, about the space you want to be in, and then let Google, Facebook, and all of these other platforms find people that it knows are going to be interested in these topics. It'll bring you still a pretty large subset of people, but from there you'll use what I just said, which was like, okay, well now test to see who actually signs up for the email. Now further it down, who actually bought something, focus on those people. But that idea, and I guess here's where I'll end it. When I talk to people who are starting off, the thing I like to say is pretend that you're an idiot. Because until the data, let the data tell you who's out there. Right? I think it's cool. Worst case scenario, you like the data will come back and tell you what you already knew. Just yeah, okay, my target audience is 18 to 24-year-old. They live in this place. Great, that just validated your thought process. Oftentimes, what I found is we think we have an idea of who our customer is, and people tend to be surprised by finding out who is the low-hanging fruit that actually ends up usually interacting in the beginning.
That's phenomenal. Really, really great advice. And so kind of bringing this to a close, let's talk a little bit about customer segments and profiles. And from your perspective, how can we best define, a singular profile, maybe not using tech, but just, from a traditional good old fashioned entrepreneur, how would you go about saying, all right, this is my first segment, or, this is who I want to target. These are my potential customers.
Yeah. I think the traditional route was to go down the idea of focusing on the person, right? So for example, like getting really granular with the idea of, oh, I'm targeting this age. So, okay, first things first, I would say get as granular as you possibly can, right? Yep. Because I think the more and more details you have about your customer, the better it helps you understand what their actual needs are. But so here's what typical process is. For example, let's take 3 categories, right? We've got demographic, location, and medium income, right? If you're like, okay, I want to target people who are 18 to 24 years old, they live in New York City, and that their average income is about $150,000, which means they might have disposable income because my product isn't a necessity, but rather luxury, for example, right? Yep. Once you've done that, typical marketing strategy up and now so far has been, okay, well, now start marketing to those people, right? Start reaching out to them. I would take it one step further than that. Use that to narrow down who you're reaching out to. But then from there, start listening in to what, take that. Okay, so you had 1,000 people in a room. You use those 3 filters to get it down to 100 people. Now throw your filters away, create new filters based not on them as individuals, but rather grouping them by their interests or like issues or common associations that they have. It'll depend on the group, right? I hate giving everyone a vague answer, but for example, if we in that original group, what we might break that down into, well, there's 2 groups of people in this. those that work from home and those that commute to work every single day.
Yep.
Now and like my product might be something that is like something for a shoe, an insole for your shoes that helps you with walking, right? Originally, I would have taken that original demographic, taken that 1,000 people, whittled it down to that 100 using the 3 demographic filters, and I would have marketed to all of them the same way. Now what I've done is, since I threw away the demographic markers, I've broken them down into a different group: work from home commuters. The work from home people most likely are rarely ever putting their shoes on in the day. The commuters, obviously every single day, they're like walking to work or so. But even the commuters, I can break down into those that ride the subway, those that drive, and those that walk to work. So now either I adjust the product if you're someone that has that capacity or that ability to adjust it. The work from home ones, maybe they like slip-on shoes like more. So maybe your insole, like when you slip on a shoe, the insole always gets creased in. Yeah. Maybe your insole, like maybe your marketing is focusing on an insole that not only makes you feel good, but it's easy. Slip on, keep moving. You don't have to adjust it. Yeah. Versus those that are walking every single day, special padding on the heel specifically. Or if you don't want to adjust the product, adjust which features you're going to highlight, right? So for the ones that are that are working from home, maybe you're going to highlight how it solves the coldness, right? It's like I put my shoes on, I'm running out real quick, and then I'm coming right back in. Our insole is made from this fabric, so I didn't have to change the insole, but I'm highlighting the fabric. Not that it's comfortable to walk in, because I know that that's not really what you care about. Right. The walking guy, oh, look how comfortable these shoes are, these insoles are. So that's what I would say. Start with the basic demographics, throw those to the side once they've helped you narrow it down, then start finding, okay, interest, issues, commonalities, and that's where like the fun of it really happens. But yeah, hope that helps.
No, I think that's excellent. So we'll open it up for questions at this time. If anybody has a question, please turn on their camera or drop it in the chat. Don't be shy. And if not, Chirag, it has been an absolute pleasure reconnecting with you. I do recall launching your chapter with you when I first got involved with CEO. And you have proven one of my theories correct, that previous CEO chapters can always find something to talk about. Chapter leaders, I should say. But yeah, so this has been wildly informative. I took lots of notes. We'll just see here for a few minutes and see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, it means a lot coming from you, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, just want to make sure I'm going to scroll through my cameras here. It doesn't look like anybody is coming forth. Any final thoughts or comments, Chirag?
I would, I would urge everyone, don't make the mistake that I made, which was the time you have at college is unique in that it is very rarely, people are always like, these are the best 4 years of my life kind of concept. I'm not going to go as far as to say that. I think that kind of actually sounds a little sad if you say that. But it was the 4 safest years of my life so far to take risks, right? And what I did is I spent a lot of time focusing on one idea and trying to perfect that idea and build it up as much as I could. When what I really should have been focusing on, what I advise people to do is, when you come up with an idea, no matter what the idea is, find out how's the quickest way I can make this. For example, people are always like, I want to start a clothing brand. If you have that idea, find the quickest way to launch a test for it. And like, for example, print on demand, linking that up with Shopify, and then using Fiverr to get designers. If you really want to launch a clothing brand, you can launch a test version that could generate revenue within a week.
Yeah.
Force yourself to first do that test version, that beta test for yourself, to actually figure out, is this something I enjoy doing? And then invest into actually building that thing out. I have a person that I'm advising right now, and he's really taking this to heart. So over the last year, he's created 5 different side hustles, these small little test ideas. He was like, Chirag, I want to do XYZ thing. Like, he wanted to build an app at one point. And he was like, I'm looking into like getting a coder. And I was like, okay, go use Bubble. Use like the cheapest way to build like a no code app. Put that out there and see if people even like it. That was one of the ideas that like he realized he hated the entire process. But what he loved was the clothing thing. And now he's generating pretty good revenue. He's actually going to go focus on another product. But because he's from the start, his focus wasn't about growing this huge clothing brand, but instead of building a simple test, he now has 5 side hustles that generate a couple $1,000s for him every month while he's sitting in college. all while having that safe space to experiment and really try things. Yeah.
Sylvia, I think you have a question.
Hello. Hi, how are you? Chirag, I'm a faculty, and everything that you mentioned, it was so informative and insightful. And those are the kind of things that I share with my students. But I have the feeling that they don't listen as or maybe I haven't used the correct words as you said, and so it made a lot of sense. I always ask them to do the customer discovery, to go out of the building. It's part of their grade actually. They do interviews, but what piece of wisdom will you share with us faculty? I see another faculty here direct from UTRGV. Yeah, go vaqueros. But that we can how can we motivate our students to do what we are asking them to do? In the way you put it, it's so simple, like in less than an hour you cover my whole semester on customer discovery. But and I have videos, I have assignments, I have ideation process, creativity, I have a lot of hands-on activities through every class or session. But what else can we do as faculty so we can send a message as you just put it?
I mean, for starters, I cannot. I mean, I'm almost tearing up here. It's professors like you that made me want to do stuff like this, that have inspired me. So to hear you to say some, I thank you. I'm honored that you would even ask that question of me. And what I would say is what I'm learning now, and I'll come back to that Barbie video I mentioned, right, on TikTok that did 1.4 million. So I've been dissecting it. I mean, it's a 65-second video, and I've maybe spent hours going over every little comment to try to understand why that video clicked as opposed to all the others. And the comments are things like what you're saying at the moment, right? And I tried using some of those strategies in this talk right now. What I've found is on the collegiate level, I'm going to overgeneralize, and please, I mean this with the utmost respect for the work that you do. I found that oftentimes for professors, they tend to explain the concepts already with the idea that they understand why it's important. So it was that same thing with initially when I started Entry. I thought that if I just created 4 pieces of marketing videos and I put it out there, I was like, I understand it's important. Like this made sense to me. Like why, like I'm teaching you this thing right off the bat. You should also understand why it's important. What I found is for a lot of students, especially when they're in that space, the thing that they struggle with, it's not the concept, it's, well, why should this even matter to me? And we tend to assume that because we know it's important, they will also understand that it's important. So what I found was what worked were those real world examples when you tie it into, and you shock them for a second to realize. So for example, in that video, a large significant chunk of the questions were because that first sentence, I was like, Barbie does this really well, right? And then most of the comments were like, oh, I didn't even realize Barbie did this. Yeah, like I fell for this trick all the time. Like, oh, I understand this. And so the moment I was able to shock what they were thinking in that moment and like give it to a real world example, they're like, oh, this is interesting. And so they felt like they had discovered something exciting and unique. And so they were like, oh, I interact with Barbie all the time. I know this. And that was sort of a catalyst for a lot of people that reached out to me because of that video. Their initial thing was, honestly, I'm not even that interested in business stuff, right? I just thought the Barbie example was cool. And now they're like coming to me with like all these other things. Oh, I learned about this concept today, which I'm like, hey, I can't even believe you're not even in a class and you're learning this stuff, was because tying it to those real world examples. So first thing I would say is before introducing, if I started off the video, which I've done with most of my videos, use the 4 P's of marketing. Use the video about the difference between your customer versus your consumer. If I lead with the concept, what I found is oftentimes immediately it's a turnoff. They've blocked it off because they don't care about the concept. When I lead more with real world examples or stories, and I think that's the biggest part, especially for our generations, more so for the younger generations coming afterwards, storytelling has become extremely key. Attention is the game, right? So same with TikTok video, online video. If you could tell a good story, then people listen and are interested enough to invest. So when you're teaching these concepts, what I would do is I would throw out the examples you have in your deck already. And I would instead open it up to what's realistic and relevant for them. People who used Barbie when they were growing up, in like that were a little bit older and remembered Toys R Us, because I mentioned that in my video. That was what my target audience was. It was actually it was older for TikTok. When I look at the analytics, it was older than the average age for TikTok. So what I found was because it only resonated with people who grew up playing with Barbies, which isn't necessarily as much like the younger generations. So for your students, I would get a group of students together and ask them what services and stuff they're using, right? I would take TikTok, for example. TikTok's a big thing, right? I mean, people sometimes make fun of it, but it's a reality. I would take any of your concepts that you're about to teach. I would go onto TikTok, find someone, and then say, hey, this so-and-so creator that grew because of this thing, here's something that helped them do it. One of my other famous videos was I started a video going, hey, all those videos that went popular on hashtag small business, the hashtag small business, which early for TikTok was like a big trend. I was like, they're using this thing called the viral brand ladder, right? And I was like, here's how you can copy it. Because I led with, okay, here's this thing that I know you want. Now let me break it down. They were a lot more interested, and it made sense to them why it matters. The same thing with the Pythagorean theorem, right? We always make fun of that. That's like the typical thing. Oh, I don't know how to do my taxes, but I learned Pythagorean theorem. How is that going to help me? Versus if you lead with teaching, oh, here's where this is going to be helpful. Do you want to know? Now let me explain the back end of it. And also the reality is not everyone's going to be interested, right? Not everyone's going to have the inch. But I found that strategy of leading with the story works better. Does that help? I hope that wasn't too general. I tried to be specific if I could.
No, that's fantastic. I actually I do use examples from my when I started my startup and all the pains and gains, and so because I'm being there, I consider myself still an entrepreneur, as I see a course as my own startup every semester, and I do work with real companies. All my classes involve adopting a real startup for an engineering project for the new venture creation classes, or an advanced company for the senior project. So I'm always working with real companies. So they transfer their knowledge build up in the classroom to a real scenario. But what the message that you sent today to this audience, I hope more people will have joined. It was really interesting in the way you put it. So I'm gonna use this recording because they're gonna get it. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna kind of share it with my students, because I love the way you made me think about the ways I encourage my students to go to LinkedIn, now Twitter, all the databases. There are many. Discord, I use Discord just to be on the same, students' environment, ecosystem, in order to understand them, how they learn. But it just, I love the way you put it. So thank you so much. And all your recommendations are really, really good. Thank you.
Appreciate that. One quick thing I'll say on that is, please, I'll share my email address, or I'll share that with James. James, if you can share it. If there are concepts that you're trying to teach that you want me to make videos on, please, I would absolutely love to. You are my target audience, right? So
yes.
if you can come to me and say, hey, this is my syllabus for next semester, and if I can create videos that you can then use in your class, that's a win-win scenario for everyone on that point.
Awesome.
So please, we'll encourage that.
Awesome.
The LinkedIn, you mentioned LinkedIn. James, I'm sorry, I know we're going a little bit over. Guys, if you are looking for investors in your area, which, I mean, CEO obviously has an amazing network extension thing, but for your college specifically, if you have not already figured out, I would research it, or email me, or I'll share it with James a little bit, the process on how to do it. I didn't realize this until I graduated, which was a big loss on my side. If you go to your college's, if you go to the college's LinkedIn and click on the alumni tab, it takes all the people that have went to that are on LinkedIn that went to that college, and then filters them based on different things like industries that they are, cities they're in, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Doing that, I've helped people go, okay, well, if someone wanted to start a clothing business, it was like, okay, go do that for your college, filter by people who are currently founders living in New York City that graduated with this degree, right, in your college. And then I want you to go reach out to them and be like, hey, I'm trying to follow in your footsteps. Can I get thoughts? Can you connect with people? And those have led to some amazing investment deals and like mentorships as well. So I would take advantage of that. Sorry, James, to go a little over time there.
We're taking over the time. Thank you. And please, if you can type on the chat your company's name and your email, that will be amazing. And of course, I'm going to reach out to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. It's always good to see you. All right, Chirag, I know that you have to get going, and we are trying to stay to time here.
Yes.
So we'll wrap here today. But again, I want to thank you so much for participating. Lots of incredible thoughts, discussion, and feedback. And I'm looking forward to next time, man.
Absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. All the kind things, it meant a lot coming from you. If any of you ever need anything or want to reach out, please, I'm always happy to have a conversation, reach out. And I just push you to a shameless promotion here, entretre.com. TikTok is where I keep most of the short form content. YouTube is where I'm trying to grow for the more long form content. If you could follow, would appreciate that. If you send an email, just mention that you were part of this talk. More than happy to talk from there. Passing it back off to you, James.
Thanks, Chirag. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. See you, man.